Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'll be reading American Trade Unionism by William Z. Foster. Today I'll be reading chapters 31 and 32. Chapter 31. The Political Maturing of Labor. Beginning about 10 years ago, the relatively weak and primitive trade union movement in this country took a great step forward in the broad campaign of the CIO to organize the unorganized workers. The general result was that today industrial unionism is solidly established. Most of the basic industries have been organized, and the numerical strength of all the unions has leaped from about 3 million in 1934 to over 13 million at the present time. Now the trade unions are in the midst of another tremendous stride forward. This is a rapid politicalization of the labor movement, a much more active and extensive intervention of the working class in the political life of our country and the world. This movement of labor politicalization will prove not less important than the organization of 10 million workers during the past decade. It signifies that our vast labor movement is now entering into a new and higher stage of political understanding, strength, and responsibility. The first decisive sign of the new political status of American organized labor was seen in the greatly extended activity of the CIO and of many AFL organizations during the recent political campaign. And the significance of the new political activities of labor is that, instead of the trade unions allowing their political movement to fall to pieces now that victory has been won by the progressive forces, the unions will go on to develop new and intense forms of political action. This was the meaning of the decision of the CIO convention to continue and expand the Political Action Committee. Some of the more progressive AFL bodies, including the Pennsylvania Federation of Labor, have also decided to continue their political action committees. Organized labor, in collaboration with its progressive allies, will henceforth take on increased interest in politics that will be something new in the American scene. The unions will be far more active factors in the constantly recurring local, state, and national elections. They will also pay much closer attention to the legislation that comes before Congress and the various state legislatures and city councils. At least 4 major reasons may be listed as to why organized labor is now making its historical advance into the field of politics. First, practically every important question that now confronts the trade unions is political in character. Wages, hours, and working conditions, questions which not long ago were matters solely for negotiation between employers and workers, are now political matters of first rank. So also are a host of other questions of social security, price control, employment, and the maintenance of high levels of production. War conditions accentuate the need for the government to keep its hands in such matters, but it is certain also that even after the war is over, the extent of the government's control over these questions will be so great that the workers will be unable to defend their interests without carrying out an organized policy of political action. A second basic reason for labor's increased political activity from now on is the fact, well realized by the workers, that in this country there is a strong and ruthless opposition which, if victorious, would not only lower the workers' living standards and undermine their unions, but would also open the road to a World War III. Hence, in rapidly increasing measure, the workers are concluding that they must enter the political arena and make their great weight count for progress. Thirdly, organized labor's politicalization is coming at this time because the unions have become numerically strong enough to be a very potent factor in politics. This they demonstrated in the recent elections. So long as the trade unions counted only 2 or 3 million members, their political influence was potentially not great, but now that they have 13 million members, they constitute a stupendous force which can be readily organized. Lastly, an important contributing element in labor's present expanding political activities is the progressive character of the CIO leadership. The reactionaries at the head of the AFL Executive Council and of many of its affiliated unions are seriously hindering the political growth of the labor movement, but, as against this reactionary force, the CIO leaders are definitely stimulating politically all sections of labor, including the advanced sections of the AFL and railroad brotherhoods. To further this political development of labor is of the most vital importance. Here we confront many serious problems. One of the most basic tasks is for the unions to learn that their programs must be formulated not only in the class interest of the workers, but in the general interest of the nation as well. Unless labor takes this broad stand, the workers and the people as a whole will never be able to cope with the grave national and international problems of this war-torn world. The CIO convention especially distinguished itself by acting in this national, patriotic sense, in contrast with the narrow line of the AFL convention. Besides this, there is the grave need for trade union unity, both nationally and internationally. The historic importance of the CIO's participation in the London World Trade Union Conference and also of President Murray's offer of political cooperation with the AFL lies in the fact that these two lines of action are entirely in tune with and indispensable for the great politicalization development now taking place in the ranks of American labor. Only by such cooperation on a national and world scale can organized labor meet the heavy political responsibilities that have been placed upon it by the whole course of military, economic, and political events. Lastly, the progressive forces in the AFL must not allow themselves to be hamstrung politically by the reactionaries and dead wood in the Executive Council. They must give a strong political lead to the workers, jointly with the CIO, as was done in the presidential elections. The political advance of the American working class cannot be blocked by AFL reactionary leaders. It is of the utmost importance that the leaders and the most advanced sections of the labor movement should realize fully the character and significance of the broad politicalization that is now taking place in the ranks of the labor unions. Only by understanding this political movement can one grasp the meaning of the new period that American labor unionism is now entering into, and be prepared to carry out the great tasks connected with this new status of our trade unions. With this present entry into politics on a mass scale as never before, a whole new horizon of responsibility and achievement opens up before the labor movement. Let us do our part to see that these glowing possibilities are realized speedily and in full. 1944. Chapter 32. Trade Unions in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, where the workers and farmers rule, the trade unions play a most vital part. Gigantic in size, comprising before the war some 26 million members, or about 85% of all workers, they are a mainspring of Soviet life. Lenin, at the Fifth Trade Union Congress in 1919, indicated their role as follows, quote, "Precisely because political power has passed over into the hands of the proletariat, it is necessary for the trade unions to come forward on an increasing scale as the architects of the new society." End quote. The Soviet political system rests upon broad, democratic mass organizations of the people, formed for every conceivable purpose, economic, political, military, cultural, etc. Stalin has listed the main great foundation organizations in the order of trade unions, local Soviets, collective farm organizations, and the Communist Party. As the basic organization of the working class, the trade union's chief task is to concern themselves with all questions affecting the immediate welfare of the workers, including wages and working conditions, production, labor protection, social insurance, cultural matters, housing, etc. They are a basic factor in the development of industry. They also play a vital role in all other issues affecting the general welfare of the Soviet nation, especially since the USSR's involvement in the war have their responsibilities become heavy and involved. In no other country in the world is the influence of the trade unions anywhere near so great as in the USSR. Are the Soviet trade unions free, in the sense of leading an autonomous existence within the USSR? The answer to this question is that they are far more independent than the trade unions in any capitalist country. But let us see first just what is meant by free trade unions. In all capitalist lands, including the United States, trade union freedom is limited indeed. Facing capitalist-controlled governments, hostile employer organizations, reactionary newspapers, and restrictive legislation that barely gives them room to breathe, the trade unions in the capitalist countries, without exception, are constantly menaced with attack by class enemies. They always run the danger of being forced into illegality or of being actually wiped out, notwithstanding such formal recognition as they may have achieved after many decades of hard struggle. Under the Weimar Republic, the German trade unions enjoyed a far greater recognition than American or British unions do now. And the world knows their fate. That the life of the American trade unions is anything but secure is obvious even from a glance at the mass of reactionary, anti-labor legislation now piling up in Congress and in many state legislatures. In such conditions, with the trade unions hedged about by restrictive laws and constantly under attack from powerful and ruthless enemies, it is stretching matters quite a bit to boast of their freedom. In the Soviet Union, the reverse of all this is true. The trade unions find themselves in quite a different and altogether freer situation. There are no enemy class forces to attack them. The workers and their farmer allies are in complete control of the government. In the Supreme Council of the USSR, workers, both of factory and office, which means trade unionists, are in a big majority. N.M. Shvernik, head of the Soviet trade unions, is president of the Council of Nationalities, one of the two equal chambers of the Supreme Council of the USSR. Worker majorities prevail in the Soviets of all industrial centers, and in the country areas the Soviet majorities are composed of friendly collective farmers. In the Communist Party, the bulk of the membership is also made up of workers who are, of course, nearly if not all trade unionists, and the party top committees contain many trade unionists. Naturally, too, the Soviet press and radio are 100% favorable to trade unionism. While the Soviet labor organizations enjoy a high degree of independence, at the same time they work in the closest collaboration with the Communist Party, the Soviet government, farmer collectives, industrial organizations, press, radio, etc. As integral parts of the people's great social organism, they all work unitedly together under the world's most advanced system of national planning for the building of socialism, a type of society whose central and sole purpose is to advance the welfare of the workers and toilers. In this friendly and cooperative environment, the Soviet trade unions function with a freedom and effectiveness hardly even dreamed of by trade unions in capitalist countries. As for the right to organize, which is constantly under attack in capitalist lands, this is so much a basic feature of Soviet life that no one would even think of assailing it. The Soviet Labor Code, which is the most advanced in the world, crystallizes into law many rights that trade unions in other countries are either still trying laboriously to achieve or have not yet even ventured to formulate. The right to organize is written into the very constitution of the USSR, which is named after Stalin. Quote, Article 126. In conformity with the interest of the working people, and in order to develop the organizational initiative and political activity of the masses of the people, citizens of the USSR are ensured the right to unite in public organizations, trade unions, cooperative associations, youth organizations, sport and defense organizations, cultural, technical, and scientific societies. End quote. The Soviet trade unions are organizationally independent of both the Soviet government and the Communist Party. The assertion of the Wols and other Soviet baiters that the Soviet labor organizations are not free is a deliberate falsification. The relation of the trade unions to the Soviet state was the subject of a big controversy between Lenin and Trotsky in 1920-21, a basic dispute which agitated the whole Soviet people for many months. Lenin insisted upon the independent role of the unions, whereas Trotsky wanted to make them organs of the state. Trotsky was overwhelmingly defeated, and Lenin's conception was endorsed. It remains Soviet policy today. As for all the allegations that the Soviet trade unions are dominated by the Communist Party, this is simply a straw man. How baseless such charges are was illustrated by Shvernik, who says that, quote, among the members of the trade union committees of factories and other establishments, 80% are non-party, End quote. As to how the Communist Party influences the decision of the Soviet trade unions, Beatrice and Sidney Webb state, quote, "If the party influences or directs the policy of individuals or public authorities, it does so only by persuasion. If it exercises power, it does so by keeping the conscience of its own members and getting them elected by the popular vote." End quote. On the basis of their independent position, the Soviet trade unions work out their policies within the general framework of the socialist program of the Soviet nation. They elect such officers and adopt such organizational forms as they see fit. They dispose of their funds as they wish. Membership in the unions is not compulsory, but voluntary. This is demonstrated by the fact that only about 85% of the workers belong to the unions. Members are attracted to the unions by the many special advantages they offer, as in other countries, except that in the USSR the trade unions have a whole series of additional benefits to offer, including the use of their vast health and recreational institution. There is no compulsion to join the unions, not even in the form of the checkoff or the closed shop, both of which are unknown in the Soviet Union. The 192 national Soviet trade unions, based upon the industrial union principle of all the workers in an enterprise belonging to one union, are highly democratic in character. Their dues and initiation fees are moderate, amounting usually to about 1% each of a month's wages. There is no discrimination against women or against people of dark skin, a factor that disgraces many AFL and railroad unions. Their broad leading committees, in which the rank and file are heavily represented, and their wide discussion of all trade union policies would, from the standpoint of democracy, put to the blush such unions as the carpenters and coal miners, which are autocratically ruled by Tsars Hutchison and Lewis. It is an insult to the Russian workers to compare their splendid unions, as the Wolls and Dubinskys do, with the employer-ridden German labor front or the Italian corporations. Instead of throwing rocks at the Russian unions, the top AFL leadership could well take lessons from them. Collective bargaining in the USSR. Carrying out their main function of attending to the immediate economic interests of the workers, the Soviet trade unions practiced collective bargaining nationally in all the individual industries. Quote, "Far from there being less collective bargaining in the USSR than in Great Britain or the United States, or in Germany before the Hitlerite dictatorship, say the Webbs, there is actually very much more than in any other country in the world." End quote. And collective bargaining is practiced by the Soviet trade unions under conditions incomparably more favorable to them and the workers than those of capitalist nations. In the USSR, where there are no capitalists, no hostile government, no antagonistic press to fight against the workers' proposals, the situation is totally different from that in the capitalist countries. The whole matter of establishing the workers' wages and working conditions is worked out on a cooperative basis between the workers and the representatives of their Soviet state. Quote, "The economic and political contradictions between workers, peasants, and intellectuals are disappearing, becoming obliterated," end quote, states the resolution of the 18th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Indeed, the wage negotiation process in the USSR can hardly be called bargaining at all, insofar as that term implies bickering and struggling. This is so because the Soviet government's industrial and other representatives, who are also workers, farmers, or professionals, are no less interested than the union leaders themselves in seeing to it that decisions are arrived at that will conserve the interests of the workers and the nation. In the 9th General Convention of the Soviet Trade Unions, Schwernik, the General Secretary, put the question of collective bargaining this way. Quote, "In capitalist countries, collective agreements are the armistice terms of two hostile forces. In the negotiation, the employers strive to force the worst conditions on the workers. Here there is no enemy. No one tries to give as little as he can for as much as he can." End quote. In the USSR, the basic wage negotiations are carried on between the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions and the leading state economic authorities and representatives of the Council of People's Commissars, as part of the general task of establishing the National 5-Year Plan and its subsidiary 1-year plans. The allocation of the whole nation's income is taken as the basis of the negotiations. In determining the total amount to be set as wages for the workers as a whole, the needs of the government for administration expenses, for national defense, expansion of industry, education, social insurance, and other necessary expenditures have also to be provided for. The draft plan thus arrived at is then sent out to the masses for discussion, after which it is reconsidered for necessary changes. This equitable, democratic, and scientific adjustment of the wage question is quite impossible in any capitalist country. After the basic wage rates have thus been established, generally and for the respective industries, the individual unions, through their national and local committees, enter into negotiation with the representatives of the various industries and factories in order to work out detailed wage and other conditions for their specific situations. These national and local agreements, besides adjusting time and piece rates, the matter of vacations, overtime, etc., also deal with a host of other questions, many of which are quite beyond the scope of American and British trade union agreements. A very important matter in trade union agreements is that of housing the workers. The English trade union experts, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, say, quote, "The foreign observer is surprised to find the safety and amenity of the places of work, the provision of hospital and sanatorium beds, the measures taken for the prevention of accidents, the provision of additional or better dwelling accommodations for the persons employed, the establishment of creches and kindergartens for the young children, the workmen's clubhouse and the technical classes provided to enable them to improve their qualifications, and many other matters of importance to the workman's daily life, dealt with in the detailed agreement, Kol Dogovar, drawn up annually in March between the management and the various workmen's committees." End quote. All these trade union agreements, national, industrial, local, are subjects of the most intense discussion by the workers before they are finally formulated and put into effect. General Secretary Schwernick in 1932 described a condition which remains typical. Quote, "The attendance of workers and employees at the meetings where drafts of the new collective agreements were discussed has in a number of enterprises been as high as 95 or 100%. End quote. Naturally, relatively few wage controversies occur in the USSR. Those that do come up are adjusted by an elaborate system of joint dispute committees, by conciliation and arbitration, and in the labor sessions of the people's courts. All these bodies, like every Soviet practice and institution, operate in the socialist spirit of advancing the workers' interests to the maximum possible under the circumstances. Heads of factories who violate trade union agreements, which have the force of law, may be severely punished. The extent to which the workers' interests are conserved under these agreements may be indicated by the fact that the body having the last word in their interpretation and application is the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions itself. Strikes are not prohibited in the Soviet Union, but they seldom occur. The fundamental reason for the lack of strikes is the equitable way of establishing the workers' wages and working conditions, coupled with the efficient and just methods of handling their grievances. In the early days of the Revolution, however, there were numerous strikes, Maurice Daub listing 505 in 1922-23, affecting 154,000 workers. These strikes were usually caused by bureaucratic neglect, by inexperienced factory managers. Of course, there are no absurd jurisdictional strikes in the USSR, with one union fighting another over which shall control this or that type of work. In recent years, with the strengthening of Soviet industrial organizations generally, and the swift rise in the workers' standards, stoppages have naturally grown fewer and fewer. During the war, with fascist hordes overrunning large sections of the country, stoppages would, of course, not be tolerated by the workers themselves, nor by their party or government. Under Soviet collective bargaining, the living and working conditions of the Soviet workers made spectacular advances, but these were temporarily checked by the outbreak of the war. The shortest workday of any country prevailed, 7 hours generally and 6 hours in heavy and dangerous trades, with time and 1/2 or double time for overtime. Huge progress had been scored, too, in developing the elaborate system of social insurance. The average annual wage of Soviet workers made an unparalleled increase from 703 rubles in 1928 to 4,360 rubles in 1941. Although the Soviet workers are unavoidably undergoing many hardships under the Hitler attack, the protection of their health and working efficiency is recognized as a major necessity for winning the war. Collective bargaining has not been abandoned. The workers in the USSR are not afflicted with profiteers seeking to exploit them ever more intensely and to throw the war's economic burdens onto their shoulders, as we now see happening in our industries and in the American Congress. Trud, the daily paper of the Soviet trade unions, expressed the fundamental policy of the Soviet system when it declared recently, quote, "The drive for improved living conditions of the working people during wartime is a matter of great military, economic, and political importance. The Soviet government pays great attention to this matter." End quote. Soviet production and the trade unions. American workers are commonly penalized for increasing production because such increases operate to bring more profits to the employer and lowered wage rates and the menace of unemployment to the workers. In the Soviet Union, a totally different situation prevails than that which exists throughout the capitalist world. With no capitalists to exact their destructive profit toll from the workers, the more the latter produce, the greater they benefit, and the more the nation as a whole prospers. This explains, too, why there are so few strikes in the USSR, for it is evident that by halting production, the workers would only be injuring themselves. From the outset of the Russian Revolution in November 1917, the Soviet trade unions have played a vital role in production, especially in cultivating an efficient and comradely labor discipline. This role has been greatly enhanced during the present war emergency. In every local and national union, and in the trade union movement as a whole, there are special departments of production. For over 20 years, in every state industry, nationally and locally, there exists committees of the unions and the managements for working out specific production problems. Between the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions and the economic apparatus of the Soviet government, there is the closest working together in every phase of production. C.T. McAvoy tells us, quote, "The State Planning Commission, composed of technicians, industrial experts, economists, and representatives of the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions, draws up a preliminary plan covering all of Soviet industry for 5 years, broken down into schedules for each year." End quote. The Webbs explain how this preliminary plan is then referred for amendment to the workers of the nation. Quote, "Gosplan, the government planning agency, now submits it for consideration through the several commissariats and other centers to all the enterprises and organizations whose proceedings for the ensuing year it will govern. In each factory or office, the part of the plan relating to that establishment is not only exhaustively examined by the directors and managers and heads of departments, but also submitted to the whole of the workers concerned through their various factory or office committees, production conferences, and trade union meetings. All sorts of suggestions and criticisms are made, which are considered by the foremen and managers and finally transmitted to Gosplan. Very often, during the last few years, the workmen's meetings have submitted a counterplan by which the establishment would be committed to a greater production than the provisional plan had proposed." End quote. This is industrial democracy on a scale and in a degree that the trade unions of the United States and Great Britain, despite their wartime labor management committees, which the employers look upon with mean and jaundiced eyes, do not even remotely approach. It is one of the most basic factors responsible for the spectacular advance of Soviet industry, which from 1929 to 1940 increased its output 5 times over, a rate of growth totally unknown in any capitalist country in all history. In a few years, the industrially backward Russia became the second industrial country in the world, and since the war began, even greater marvels of production have been achieved, as we shall note later on. These accomplishments could not possibly have been made without the wholehearted cooperation of the trade unions. Precisely because there is no capitalist exploitation in the USSR, the trade unions of that country freely adopt incentive systems of various sorts, many of which are difficult for American trade unionists living in a totally different capitalist environment to understand. The basis for the general work and wage policy of the USSR is laid down in that country's national constitution as followed. Quote, Article 12. In the USSR, work is a duty and a matter of honor for every able-bodied citizen in accordance with the principle, he who does not work shall not eat. The principle applied in the USSR is that of socialism, from each according to his ability to each according to his work. End quote. This means that under Soviet socialism, according to the principles long ago enunciated by Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin, the workers are paid upon the basis of what they produce. Those who argue that equality of wages is a feature of socialism speak either from ignorance or a desire to deceive. In the USSR, there are different scales of wages, a system which, under socialism, constitutes a powerful incentive to production and for workers to fit themselves for more skilled and better paid work. The higher communist work principle of from each according to his ability to each according to his needs can be achieved only later in the USSR, when the question of production ceases to be a serious problem, through the necessary broad expansion of industry and agriculture, the development of a highly skilled and efficient working class, and the decline of the need to maintain big armed forces. The most basic form of incentive wages in the USSR is the piecework system, which is widely prevalent in the industries. But piecework in the USSR has been systematically misrepresented for years by enemies of the Soviet Union, such as Matthew Wohl, who have claimed that it causes exploitation of the workers. Soviet trade union leader Shvernik, speaking of pre-war conditions, thus explains it. Quote, Here, where the state is exercising the maximum degree of care in the protection of labor, and where we have a working day lasting 7 hours, the piecework system accelerates the tempo of socialist construction, increases the productivity of labor, and guarantees the improvement of the material and general living conditions of the workers. End quote. Accordingly, in the USSR, say the Webbs, there are none of the clever piecework systems by which, in capitalist industry, the workers are made to gain less per unit the faster they work. Under Soviet communism, the piecework rates are never digressive. They are, in some cases, even progressive, the rates rising by stages for output beyond the norm. In Soviet industry, there are a host of additional incentive methods, all of which can be understood only in the light of the socialist system of the USSR, in contrast to the exploitation in effect in capitalist countries. Among these methods may be cited the famous Stakovanite movement, created by the rank-and-file workers themselves to devise more efficient methods of production, socialist competition between workers, shops, industries, and cities for better and greater production, shock brigades of udarniki, or best workers, who improve the output of whole plants and industries, cost accounting brigades, which find means for reducing production costs, the policy of the best working departments and shops towing the weaker ones by helping them directly, comradely courts in the factories which give praise or blame to competent or neglectful workers, the conferring of Soviet orders upon heroes of labor and upon extra-efficient industries, etc. These many methods have been expanded and various new ones developed as the trade unions have bravely tackled the gigantic industrial problems thrust upon them by the war. In all this work of carrying on and improving production, great care is used to protect the health and strength of the workers, for which purpose the USSR has enacted and diligently applies the best and most elaborate system of labor protection laws and shop practices of any country. Social insurance, labor protection, cultural work. The Soviet trade unions, in addition to their wage and production activities previously indicated, carry on normally in peacetime 3 other major mass functions in the fields of social insurance, labor protection, and cultural work. In all these matters, they operate on a scale and with an authority quite unknown in any other country. As in the case of wages and production, the labor unions, from the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions down to the factory committees, have special commissions which organize these activities. The Soviet Union, true to its socialist character, is far and away the world leader in all forms of social insurance. The right of the workers to this protection is established in the Stalin Constitution of the USSR, which states, quote, Article 120, citizens of the USSR have the right to maintenance in old age and also in case of sickness or loss of capacity to work, end quote. Accordingly, the government spends huge sums annually for its elaborate system of social insurance. Neither the proposed beverage plan in England nor that of the National Resources Planning Board in the United States reaches anywhere near the level of the Soviet social insurance system. In their book on the USSR, the Webbs say, quote, as with public education, the sums allocated to all these services have been increasing year by leaps and bounds, calculated to reduce to despair the finance minister of any capitalist community, end quote. The Soviet 1941 national budget provided no less than 49 billion rubles for the network of social insurance, education, and cultural projects. At all stages of their lives, the Soviet workers are financially protected from every possible hazard: sickness, old age, accidents, permanent disability, maternity, death, etc. The insurance benefits range from 50 to 100% of the workers' regular wages. The funds are provided by payroll assessments against the state industrial enterprises, the workers making no direct contributions. The only hazard not covered by insurance is unemployment, for there is no unemployment in the socialist system which constantly permits the full productive capacity of the people. Soviet workers are entirely free of the dread of joblessness because their scientific economic system has completely abolished industrial crises and other causes of mass unemployment. The Constitution of the USSR provides, quote, Article 118, citizens of the USSR have the right to work, that is, are guaranteed the right to employment and payment for their work in accordance with its quantity and quality. The right to work is ensured by the Socialist Organization of National Economy, the steady growth of the productive forces of Soviet society, the elimination of economic crises, and the abolition of unemployment, end quote. The vast social insurance systems of the USSR has, since 1933, been under the direct administration of the trade unions. In any capitalist country, the exploiters would be frantic at a proposal to turn over even their scanty social insurance systems to the management of the trade unions. Yet in the Soviet Union, where capitalism has been abolished, to put the unions in charge is deemed perfectly natural and proper. The All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions manages the funds generally. The various national trade unions take care of insurance matters in their respective industries, and the actual distribution of benefits to the workers is handled by the local factory committees. For this purpose, each factory committee has a broad social insurance council, elected by direct vote of the workers. These factory insurance councils decide upon the amount of compensation in each case, and they also check to see that the state enterprises keep their assessments paid up. In the field of labor protection, too, the Soviet trade unions exercise great powers, such as unions in capitalist countries would hardly dream of. It is their right and task to administer the whole body of labor laws in the USSR. These laws, guaranteeing the 7- and 6-hour day, time and one-half and double pay for overtime, the fullest rights of trade union organization and collective bargaining, complete protection of women and young workers, thoroughgoing health and safety measures, paid vacation provisions for all workers, etc., are without their equal anywhere. In 1934, the government abolished the existing National Department of Labor and turned its function over to the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions, it being taken for granted in a socialist regime that no group in the country is more competent or trustworthy to administer the nation's labor laws than those persons most directly concerned, the workers themselves. But imagine what a wild outcry such a proposal in the United States would wring from the reactionaries. The Soviet trade unions, in protecting the rights and welfare of the workers in the industries, have the power to issue regulations having the binding force of law, and for whose infraction careless or bureaucratic factory managers may be punished. To supervise the country's great labor protective service, the trade union movement has its own system of factory inspectors. Each factory council has a commission to attend to problems of local enforcement in the plant, mine, office, or railroad. In the broad field of education and general culture of mind and body, the Soviet trade unions also carry on immense activities and bear unique responsibilities. One great program in the gigantic work of educating the Soviet people that the government is now working on is, as Schwernik puts it, quote, towards the realization of the historic task of raising the cultural and technical level of the working class in the USSR to the level of engineers, end quote. This is a concept utterly unthinkable in any capitalist educational system. The scope of the unprecedented educational work going on just prior to the war, in spite of the government's necessity to devote a huge share of the national production to building the industrial system and to strengthening the armed forces, may be gathered from the statement of Molotov in 1939 at the outset of the third five-year plan. Quote, the student body is our institution of higher learning, he said, is greater than the combined total of Germany, England, France, Italy, and Japan. He added, our libraries contain 75 books for each 100 inhabitants of the Soviet Union, which is over 3 times as many as Germany had in 1934. In 1932, the production of books in the USSR, surpassed by far in later years, reached the vast total of 500 million copies, which, the Webbs estimate, quote, probably exceeds the output for the year of all the publishers in the rest of the world, end quote. Every open-minded, honest observer of what is taking place in the USSR is enthusiastic about that country's tremendous mass cultural work. In every sphere of Soviet life, scientific principles are assiduously applied in raising the national economy and the people to higher levels. In this respect, the Webbs say, quote, it is, we think, clear that the Soviet government, inspired and guided by the Central Committee of the Communist Party, has, during the past decade, manifested a greater devotion to science than any other government in the world. Not only does it spend more on the teaching of science and on the promotion of scientific research, but it habitually defers more, in its policy and practice, to the lessons of science. End quote. The trade unions are deep in the whole great Soviet cultural advance. Their representatives are playing decisive roles in state and voluntary educational movements and institutions of all sorts, to an extent hardly dreamed of by British and American labor organizations. They work in closest collaboration with the Departments of Health and Education. They are also carrying on a very extensive educational work upon their own score, sometimes with government social insurance monies, but often with the union's funds. Schwernik says that from 1933 to 1938, the trade unions conducted classes for 5 million illiterates and semi-literates, and he further declared that the total number of trade union members who are members of cultural circles, political, general educational, defense, dramatic, music, singing, sports, etc., increased from 4,730,000 in 1935 to 6,573,000 in 1938. In trade union libraries of more than 1,000 books each, there were, in 1938, 6,343,000 subscribers who read an average of 18 books yearly. Add to such activities some 800 trade union sanatoriums and rest homes, innumerable child care institutions, workers' clubs, moving picture houses, dancing, art and literary circles, physical culture groups, organized excursions, etc., and one gets at least a faint idea of the vast cultural and recreational work being done by the Soviet trade unions. The AUCCTU, among its many other activities, gives national leadership to the labor movement on all these questions through its highly specialized sanatoriums and health resort department, tourist department, sports bureau, engineers and technical workers bureau, Proletarian Students Bureau, Trade Union Academy, Institute of Scientific Research, Trade Union Movement, etc. In short, wherever the interests and welfare of the workers are to be promoted, in wage standards, social security, working conditions, housing, education, health, there the Soviet trade unions are tirelessly active and exercising a profound influence. 1943. And that is the end of chapter 32 and the end of the video altogether. Thank you for listening to the Workers' Reading Room. Have a good evening.
And see if you remember the struggles of before, when you were standing helpless nails on the outside of the door, and you started building lanes